The scent of toasted bread and simmering espresso floated through the De Laurentiis villa like a ritual. Every morning, I woke up before the sun, tied my apron with practiced grace, and laid out the breakfast table with the precision of someone who no longer needed instructions. Marcella entered without greeting. Her heels clicked like accusations across the stone floor. "Always overcooked," she said in Italian, pointing at the eggs. "At least the coffee is decent." Not that she understands a word. Dominic sipped his espresso without looking at me. "Thanks, Mom. You always make mornings feel special." I nodded, smiling faintly, not out of submission, but as a mask. I folded napkins, adjusted silverware. I had heard those words before. I would hear them again. But silence is not surrender. It's observation. It's ammunition. Have you ever stayed quiet just to observe? By the time they disappeared into the rest of their day, I was already in my corner, my sanctuary, a converted pantry no one bothered to enter. I pulled my laptop from beneath a stack of recipe books. The screen glowed softly, revealing numbers and charts and customer orders in 3 currencies, Arden and Arte. My company, 8 years old, profitable and fully operational, even if no one here suspected a thing. They thought I was just the wife, the outsider, but I was the one connecting Italian artisans to American luxury markets. Under a pseudonym, of course. Always under a pseudonym. My inbox pinged. A high-end client from Milan wanted to meet the elusive CEO in Florence next month. My name. My voice. I whispered the possible replies in English. Then in Italian. Clear. Fluent. With confidence I hadn't heard in my own voice in years. What would you do if your biggest secret was also your biggest power? Marcella reappeared before lunch, whispering as if the table were a church confessional. "If we push her out," she said to Dominic, "this house becomes yours entirely. The inheritance won't split." I was setting the cutlery. My hand stilled for half a second, then continued. Dominic shrugged. "She has nowhere to go." "She doesn't need to know until the papers are ready," Marcella added. I heard every syllable. Not one of them cut me the way it should have, because something deeper had already started shifting. I didn't cry. I memorized. I cataloged. I stored. That afternoon, as I responded to order inquiries, Marcella passed behind me. She paused. A flicker. Her gaze had caught the subject line of an open email on my screen. Export Partnership, Italy, U.S. She said nothing, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the doorframe. Have you ever caught someone trying to erase you quietly? Later, I cleaned up the kitchen alone, the sun bleeding gold across the tiled patio. I wiped a fingerprint off a glass, and a memory arrived uninvited. I was 10. Serena, my older sister, talked over me at the dinner table, explaining my opinion before I could. "You belong in kitchens, not boardrooms," she'd once said, and my father had chuckled like it was truth. I looked at the clean plate in my hand and wondered how many years I'd lived under other people's expectations. Lucien's words from months ago came back, his voice always a low murmur of faith. When they don't see you, that's when you build. A soft ding, a text. When you're ready to act, I'm here. Who was the first person that made you feel small? And the first who helped you feel seen? That night, I stepped onto the balcony. The Tuscan hills sprawled out below, hushed and eternal. Marcella's voice repeated in my mind, not as an insult, but as a spark. They think I'm clueless. I'm not. I understand more than they ever will. Inside, I opened a notebook and uncapped a pen. The first line I wrote was deliberate, clean. Exit strategy, phase 1. I underlined it. Have you ever planned your comeback in absolute silence? Florence was gray that day, the kind of gray that clings to your clothes, to your skin, to your instincts. Marcella announced the trip with a smile too wide to be genuine. "We're just going to look at an apartment," she said. Dominic didn't meet my eyes when he handed me my coat. We arrived at a modest stone building, freshly painted, with a balcony view overlooking the Arno. Investment, Marcella called it. Just something we might convert. Inside, they walked ahead, talking in lowered tones that rose into confidence, once they assumed I couldn't understand. "She'll sign anything if you put enough legalese in it," Marcella whispered. Dominic chuckled. "I'll draft the agreement once we're back. She won't know what she's giving up." They didn't know I understood. Not just the words, but the intent, the pattern, the strategy. Have you ever listened silently, knowing you'd use their words against them later? I smiled faintly when Marcella asked if I liked the tile work. Back in the car, I didn't speak. But in my coat pocket, my phone buzzed softly, still recording. The file auto-backed up to my cloud the second the Wi-Fi reconnected. I labeled it clearly. Asset Severance Conspiracy, November. At dinner that night, they were louder, bolder. "She's an American," Marcella scoffed. "They don't have the stomach for real business." Dominic laughed. "Valeria? She wouldn't last a week without our name, without this house." I poured myself water, carefully, not a drop spilled. "Would you keep the truth as insurance, or weaponize it?" I waited until they finished eating, until the dishes were cleared. Then I excused myself, walked to my office, and returned with my laptop. I placed it in the center of the dining table, open, audio playing. Their voices filled the room, clearer than any confession ever could be. Dominic's fork clinked against his plate. Marcella froze, then turned an awful shade of white. Her lips pressed tight, not from shame, but from calculation. I looked at them both and, for the first time, spoke Italian. "Pensavate che non capissi, ma ho capito. Ogni singola parola." You thought I didn't understand. I did. Every single word. I clicked to the next folder. Bank transfers, incorporation documents, IP filings. All in my name. All legitimate. All mine. "This company," I said still in Italian, "is mine. This revenue, this home, this life, it was never yours to take. If you could say one thing to someone who underestimated you for years, what would it be?" Marcella stood slowly. "You tricked us." "No," I said. "You assumed I was small. That was your mistake." By morning, the rumors had begun. First in whispers at the local cafe, then in full sentences at church. Marcella had told them I was a fraud, that I stole from the family, manipulated Dominic, used the business as a front. 2 clients pulled out by noon. A supplier delayed shipment. It didn't hurt my margins, but it rattled the walls I'd built so carefully. Dominic said nothing. When I asked if he was going to set the record straight, he shrugged. "I told you, silence makes things easier." I picked up my phone and called Ethan Cole. "We need to prepare a legal response," I told him. "And I want to sue for defamation." Gianna messaged that evening. Screenshots of Marcella's posts. Comments contradicting her. Messages from other women in town who'd heard similar lies before. This was no longer a family dispute. It was war, quiet, strategic, professional. And I had no intention of surrendering. Have you ever had someone attack your name just because they couldn't control you anymore? 6 months passed with a quiet that didn't feel like absence, but like oxygen. I moved into a small flat above a coffee shop in Florence, the kind of place where the mornings smelled like warm milk and the afternoons hummed with passing bicycles. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't meant to be. It was mine. Every morning, I opened my laptop at the little wooden table by the window and worked without hiding, without minimizing screens or listening for footsteps. Gianna handled the local operations now. She had a sharp mind and a sharper instinct for when something wasn't right, and she alerted me whenever Marcella's name surfaced in the artisan circles. Lucien visited often. He'd bring legal notes, articles, insights, but more than that, he brought clarity. "You're not rebuilding," he told me once. "You're building for the first time without their hands pressing on your shoulders." Even Enzo, whose loyalties had once been foggy at best, sent quiet updates. "She's losing ground," he texted one evening. "People aren't believing her story anymore." I thanked him. I never trusted him, but I listened. This time, control wasn't an illusion. My company existed in two legal worlds now, Italy and the United States, and my name was on every document, every license, every account. Ownership wasn't questioned anymore. But the decision that steadied me most happened in silence. I began negotiating quietly, discreetly, to buy back the very apartment Marcella tried to strip from me. The same balcony, the same stone floors, the same rooms she once said should belong to a real De Laurentiis. Have you ever reclaimed something? Not to possess it, but to prove a point? I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. One late afternoon, when Florence glowed orange and the city softened into its evening rhythm, I signed the final document. My name alone. No shared deed. No shadow signatures. The apartment was mine. And for the first time in years, I closed my eyes and breathed without feeling watched. That breath carried me into the next step. The truth, unfiltered. I didn't plan to make a video. It wasn't some dramatic impulse. It was necessity. People deserved to hear my voice directly, without Marcella's edits, without Dominic's distortions. I sat at my small desk, pressed record, and spoke in both English and Italian. My name is Valeria Arden. For 8 years, I ran a business under a different name so I could work in peace. I stayed silent, not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too much. I told the whole story, calmly, without accusation. I played the audio recording. I showed receipts, timelines, legal filings. The video spread, first quietly, then suddenly everywhere. Italian artisans, American clients, women's business groups, expat forums. Comments poured in, full of stories from people who had been dismissed, underestimated, silenced. Marcella's influence cracked under the weight of her own words. Ethan handled the legal fallout, and every attempt at a defamation suit dissolved before gaining traction. Do you believe silence is power, or is telling your story louder than revenge? For the first time, I let myself believe that the world didn't tilt automatically in their favor. Around that time, I began working closely with Julian. He was steady, thoughtful, and frustratingly intuitive. Together, we designed a philanthropic project to support women rebuilding their lives after leaving controlling households. Tuscany had more silent stories than anyone wanted to admit. Some nights, we stayed late, sketching designs and calculating logistics, the air between us steady and warm. He made me laugh, the kind of laugh that didn't feel borrowed or cautious. But peace is delicate. When he learned the full story, not just the facts, but the contours of my pain, he stepped back. He didn't vanish dramatically. He just paused. "I don't want to be the person you lean on because you're fighting ghosts," he said. "I need to know you want a future, not just retribution." It hurt, more than I wanted to admit. For days, I worked alone, trying to distinguish between justice and bitterness, between the life I was building and the shadows I thought I'd outrun. Then a letter arrived in my mailbox. His handwriting, neat, honest. I had to step away to understand something. You aren't driven by revenge. You're driven by truth. And I want to stand beside someone who knows the difference. He came back, and this time it felt like foundation, not decoration. Is trust something you rebuild alone, or does someone have to walk back into your life to help you carry it? Months later, I found myself standing on the red circle at TEDx Milan. The stage was brighter than I expected, and the audience was a blur of waiting faces. My talk was titled, "Silence Isn't Weakness." I spoke in English first, slowly, deliberately. Then I switched to Italian, not out of defiance, but belonging. They spoke over me, and while they did, I built a business beneath them. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. Someone in the back whispered, "Brava." When I finished, they stood. All of them. Julian recorded from the second row. Lucian smiled like he'd known this moment would come long before I did. Backstage, my phone buzzed. A message from Serena. My sister. 7 words. Maybe I was wrong about you all along. I stared at the screen, the applause still echoing behind me. Who would you want to hear from after proving yourself to the world?